So you have this, pretend it's full bobbin of applied yarn that you finished. What do you do next? Well, for knitting, certainly, you'll want to wet finish this yarn. I will want any change that's going to happen to this, whether it be shrinking or fluffing up or twist redistributing, I want that to happen before I start knitting it. I don't want to knit something and then have it massively change the first time it gets washed. I want to get all that out of its system. For weaving, you may not want to do that. For weaving, you may want to have all the wet finishing happen in one go when you wet finish your cloth. So you may just want to wind this off into a ball or a skein, however you generally store your weaving yarn. But for knitting and crochet, and indeed most weaving that I do wet finish first. So the first thing to do is wind this into a skein. A skein is simply a big loop of yarn. So there's several ways to do that. The easiest one is to go round under your elbow, up to your hand, and wind a loop like this. You may, however, have a tool called a niddy noddy. This is a small one. It slides together like that. To wind a skein on one of these, you will start at the top, just loop it round so it doesn't slip. Go under one side, over the other, under, over. And you can see the path that takes. Now, if you want to know the length of your yarn, you can count the wraps you're making on your niddy noddy and then measure the length of the skein and multiply the two together. If you're going to do that, I suggest you measure the length of the skein after wet finishing, because chances are it will shrink. Depending on your spinning method, it may shrink up to about 30%. So it's worth measuring afterwards rather than doing it now. Okay, so I've got to the end. Now, you can secure your skein in just one place, but I worry that it's likely to come apart if I do that. So I will wrap the end round here. I'll move the camera down so you can see me tying the knot. And then we just hitch that around there. Do not do this too tightly. And the other end is tied around here. I'll pop that off. And again, do a half hitch around there. Now, 2 loops isn't quite enough. If I take this off, it is entirely possible that while wet, for example, this strand could end up over here and then the whole thing would be very hard to unwind. So what I really want to do is tie at least in at least 4 places. So I would do another tie here. Make sure the ties are nice and loose so the water can penetrate and the twist can move around. And this is a very small skein, so I don't need to worry too much about it. But if I had a very, very large skein, I might even figure of 8 my ties. I would split the skein and go under there, over there, back under and out. And you can see that just stops it moving around even more. This single tie can slide up and down, whereas this one is far less likely to go anywhere. And you can see this skein wants to twist on itself as if it's overplied. Again, I said in the last video, that is perfectly normal. Once this has been wet finished, the singles twist will reawaken and it will balance out against this plying twist. So unless your singles are incredibly fresh when you plied, you want your freshly skeined yarn to look slightly overplied. That will generally mean it's balanced. So the next stage is to give this a soak. I'll show you another way I wind my skeins. I tend to do this if I've got a large amount of very fine yarn. You can see this is pretty fine, it's on the bobbin there. goes through my yarn counter. It's just raised up on a couple of books, so the guide comes off level to wind on to this skein winder. This yarn counter will be available on Kickstarter hopefully within the year. It's very useful. So now I'm ready to wet finish my yarn. I've got it in a skein that's tied in 4 places so it won't come apart, and there I have a bucket of warm water from the tap. That's all it is, it's just water. If this yarn had silk in, I might put a little bit of washing up liquid in, as that helps silk get more easily wetted, or if I'd spun it from raw fleece that I'd left a little bit of grease in, again I might put some washing up liquid in to get the rest of that grease out. But for yarn that's spun from clean commercial top, I just use warm water. So I'm going to push this down and then leave it for 15 to 20 minutes until it's fully wetted. Okay, so this yarn has been soaking in this bucket for about 15 minutes. It's fully wet through. You can see there's no lighter patches that have still got air in it, so that means it's ready for the next step. I will simply take it out, make sure I've got one of my fingers around where one of the ties is, so I'm not pulling up just half the strands, and let it dry. Now I know a lot of people say they don't wring their yarn here. Well, I do. I try and treat this yarn now as roughly as I'm ever going to treat it. If it's going to felt or fluff up or shrink or do anything untoward, I want that to happen now before I waste all the time knitting it up to just have it change. So I'm not wringing it to within an inch of its life, but I'm squashing most of the water out of it. Now I will get it. It's a very long skein, so you won't be able to. In fact, I'll fold it in half so you can see both my hands. So this is what it'd look like if it was a smaller skein. I simply put it between my wrists and snap, and move it around and snap again. I'll do this a few times in different places. It just helps the twist even out around the skein. So I've got a little bit more there than I have here. By soaking it and then moving it, that twist is going to redistribute itself nicely. And you'll see, I've managed to turn the skein inside out a little bit, but you'll see it's hanging straight here, it's not twisting on itself. It's a nice balanced yarn. This is a very fine lace yarn. I'm going to make a Shetland lace shawl with it, so balanced yarn was what I wanted with this. Now, for a different sort of yarn, I may well finish it differently. If it was a singles, I would want to full it slightly to get as much shrinking out of the way as possible and make it a little bit more resilient. So with a singles, I would dunk it in this bucket of hot water, then in a bucket of cold, squish it out, back in the hot, repeat that several times until the strands, fibres between the strands just started to stick together, and then I would carry on drying it as I would with this. For fluffy woolen spun yarns, some people do what they call is thwacking, which is getting the skein, move this water out of the way, getting the skein and whacking it against something like that. The side of the bath or somewhere. I don't do that. I think it's stupid. It doesn't serve any purpose. It doesn't fluff the yarn up any more than a cold water and then a hot water dunk a couple of times. If you enjoy doing it, then go ahead, take your frustration out on your yarn. It really isn't necessary. So I've squeezed most of the water out of this. I need to dry it fully. Downstairs I have a spin dryer, which is fantastic for this, but up here I go a bit more old school. I will reposition the camera and return. And here I just have a towel laid out on the floor. I will get my damp yarn, lay it out on the towel, and then roll it up. Once I've rolled it all the way up this way, and then roll it up again that way. Pulls a nice tight little snail that I can then stand on and squash all the excess water out of. Now this skein is close enough to dry. I can put it around a hanger and I can hang it from a curtain rail or the shower rail or wherever I want to dry, and depending on the weather outside, this normally dries within 24 hours. And once it's dried, I can then wind it into a ball and start knitting.